Welcome to the deep dive, where we take that whole stack of source material you've gathered, all the articles, the excerpts, the author's notes, and we really boil it down to what actually matters, the big ideas, the surprising connections.
Exactly.
And today, wow, we're plunging headfirst into a world of uh, literary fame, fan betrayal, and some pretty serious creative desperation. We are unpacking Colleen Hoover's explosive new novel, Woman Down.
It's such a fascinating book because it's completely metafictional. I mean, you're not just reading a suspense novel. You're reading a novel about being a massively successful author and all the pressure that comes with it.
Right.
And the sources you've given us. I mean, we have extensive plot excerpts. We have all this industry praise for her past work. And critically, we have the author's note that sort of frames this whole thing. It lets us look at the plot with this real-world context of celebrity authorship in the background.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. When we say Colleen Hoover, we are talking about a true literary phenomenon. I was looking at the research. She sold something like 35 million copies worldwide.
35 million. It's an incredible number.
It's not just a number, it's a whole cultural wave. And her work is so interesting because she's so versatile. You have these really emotional, life-changing books like It Ends With Us.
Which USA Today called a forever keeper.
A forever keeper, exactly. And then you have these psychological thrillers like Verity. The Washington Post said that one delivered the grand slam of thriller twists, so she can do both.
And that dual expertise is so important for this book. It's the whole setup for her new protagonist, Petra Rose. Petra is an author of emotional fiction, and she suddenly finds herself needing to write a thriller.
Okay.
A huge success. The intense, almost visceral loyalty of her readers, the source material calls it fandom discussions. That's the exact reason why her character's public crisis just hits so hard. Because that loyalty, as we're about to see, can turn to rage really, really quickly.
So our mission for this deep dive is to get past just the plot summary and really analyze the themes. We're going to dissect, what, 3 critical layers?
I think so. First, there's the anatomy of the fictional protagonist's public breakdown. Then there's all the industry commentary that's woven into the story. It almost feels like Hoover is processing the whole publishing machine.
And finally, the really shocking part, the destructive length Petra goes to, blurring that line between inspiration and, frankly, trauma.
And we have to start with the context from the author herself. That author's note is incredibly revealing.
It really is.
Hoover says she needed a 3-year break after it starts with Us, because her career had become, and this is a quote, more stressful than normal. And this book, Woman Down, it's an expanded version of an old short story she wrote called Saint. She said that diving back into this story gave her back that same joy she felt when she first wrote it.
That detail feels so crucial to me. It frames the entire novel as like a therapeutic exercise, a way for her to get back to the joy of creating after the business of creating became just suffocating.
But there's a tension in that note, isn't there? She makes a very specific request of the reader.
She does, and we have to highlight it, especially given how meta this whole story is.
Absolutely. She's basically asking the reader up front to please avoid making ties between this story and her personal life, her morals, or her feelings about the industry. She says the book is just a fun journey the characters took me on and nothing more.
Which is such a fascinating thing to say.
It is. Because it suggests she knows exactly how much commentary she packed into this narrative. She knows readers are going to try to draw those parallels. So it sets up this challenge for us, How do we respect her intent while also analyzing the deep fictional commentary she clearly embedded in the book?
Okay, let's respect that boundary. We'll pivot directly to the fictional drama, it's intense, from page 1. Let's dive into part 1, Petra Rose's journey from literary darling to digital enemy.
So Petra Rose is introduced as this international bestseller. She's the darling of book clubs, but her reputation is already, as the book says, erupting into literary flames.
And the title of her famous novel, A Terrible Thing, is kind of a jab in itself, right? The fictional podcast hosts in the book, the gossip sommelier and the fiction therapist, they immediately roast it.
They do. They call it probably the worst book title of all time, and suggest she was asking for this backlash.
That is a perfect example of that meta-commentary you mentioned. It shows how the industry is just so ready to tear down the very thing it builds up. But the real crisis, the source of her meltdown, wasn't the title, it was the adaptation disaster.
The hashtag a terrible adaptation.
Exactly.
And what made it so terrible wasn't, bad acting or anything like that. It was that it failed to be faithful to the emotional heart of the novel. A Terrible Thing was built on this really beloved love triangle.
Yeah.
The core of it was Elise, Ash and Caleb.
And this was the engine of her whole fandom. The source material talks about 1,000 hashtag Team Ash versus hashtag Team Caleb debates, entire subreddits just dedicated to this emotional tug of war.
She even monetized it. She
Yeah.
sold merch for both sides of the love triangle. Her whole brand was built on that delicious friction between the two camps.
And the adaptation, in a move that I think would give any book fan chills, they just cut Caleb.
Just gone.
Not a smaller role, not a cameo. Completely removed him from the story and restructured everything to be just about Ash and Elise. The trailer drops, and there is, quote, zero mention of him.
The fans felt not just let down, but like a visceral betrayal. And this is where the meta-commentary is so smart. It wasn't just the Caleb fans who were angry. The fictional podcast host, Kelly, she points out that by getting rid of Caleb, they destroyed the one thing that gave the entire fandom its meaning. The debates, the merch, all of it.
There's a brilliant quote from Kelly about the fan reaction. She says they were at screaming in the rain while covered in red wine stains, levels of betrayed.
It's just a perfect, hilarious, and dramatic summary of that kind of high-stakes literary drama.
So initially, Petra tries the standard author defense. She posts on Instagram, claims she had no creative control, and tells her followers, hey, besties, I was just as shocked as you all were.
Right, she's trying to put herself on their side, to be a victim with them, to hang on to that intimacy that made her so successful in the first place.
And it backfires spectacularly.
It's a pivot point, because the lie gets exposed almost immediately. The thing that flips her from darling to enemy is the leaked text exchange between her and the producer, Alistair Jones. That's the smoking gun.
And we have the quote from the source material. It's just brutal. She knew about the cut, and she approved it. She wrote, you're right, there's a lot out there about him being unrealistic. I'm fine with that character being cut. Might make it a stronger film with Caleb and the love triangle out.
Oof. That one sentence is everything. It's the core of her crime in the eyes of the fandom. By saying it might be a stronger film with Caleb out, she's basically siding with a few literary snobs over her hundreds of thousands of loyal readers.
She chose the industry over the intimacy.
Exactly. She chose perceived critical validation over the emotional contract she had with her audience. And that just sent the fans into orbit.
Okay.
It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was a deep moral injury.
She's accused of lying, of being a sellout, and this is what fuels the literary rebellion online. You get the hashtags, hashtag cancel Petra, hashtag a terrible author, and then in a really shocking detail that mirrors real life, fans start literally burning copies of her book.
That image, burning books, it just shows how high the stakes were. This isn't a bad movie review anymore. This is a total public rejection of her and her work. The source material really dives into the psychological toll on her. She feels buried in rubble. She's wondering who would even care if she was suffocating to death. The digital world that made her is now her relentless antagonist.
And the financial fallout is immediate. Her sales take a nosedive. She's in serious trouble. We learn she has a past due mortgage, and she has to write this new book, Woman Down, just to avoid losing her house.
And that urgent financial pressure is colliding head-on with this crippling writer's block that started the second the public scrutiny began.
The irony is just, it's a perfect setup for dramatic tension.
It is. The very thing she needs to do to survive, create, is the one thing her anxiety is preventing her from doing. The pressure cooker is sealed tight.
So in this desperate attempt to break the cycle, she tries what her friend Nora calls exposure therapy. And this leads her to listen to the one thing she should be avoiding at all costs.
A podcast dissecting her own downfall.
Yes, and what now, readers? The hosts, Kelly the fiction therapist and Micah the gossip sommelier, are just this fantastic piece of satire on their own.
They are. And they're lovingly, but also ruthlessly, just picking apart her betrayal. The segment Petra tunes into has them tearing into that text message she sent. And then they announce their surprise guest.
Alistair Jones, the producer of the movie.
Or as Petra calls him in her head, Alistair McFuckety Fuckface.
Right before she slams off the podcast, feels very close to puking and has to pull her car over just to breathe. It's just this moment of complete sensory overload.
And her friend Nora calls later, totally horrified that she actually listened. She was like, I meant exposure to social media comments, not digging up everyone talking shit about you.
That conversation with Nora gives us our first real glimpse into Petra's isolation, right? She's repeating this mantra, you did nothing wrong, but she admits it feels like a total lie.
And her friends in the industry have all ghosted her. She realizes they were never friends. They were just unhappy coworkers trying to survive until we retire. The professional support system is revealed to be completely transactional.
So that career anxiety is what's really driving her desperation. If the industry is fake and her fans hate her, where does she go? Which brings us perfectly to part two, the writer's retreat, and the search for a new muse.
She's driving 2 hours out of the city, literally running toward a sanctuary,
Mhm.
but also just fleeing the chaos. Her goal is total immersion. Writing is the only thing that quiets the anxiety, even for a little while.
And she has this vision in her head of what the cabin will be like. Rustic, authentic, a place to feel grounded and isolated.
But the setting immediately betrays that hope. It just creates this instant sense of dread. She wanted roughness, unsanded walls, charm. Instead, she gets this newly remodeled paradox.
Sleek surfaces, polished concrete, sterile white walls. It feels exactly like the hyper-modern transactional world she was trying to escape.
It's a place designed to execute tasks, to work, but not to create. The environment is just a mirror of her own internal sterile state. The creative spark has nowhere to land, and the fact that there are neighbors so close by just amplifies her anxiety.
And then those neighbors show up. The overly cheerful rental host, Louis Longsetter.
A name she immediately finds absurd and suspicious.
Right, and he greets her with this, unsettling buoyancy. She's so on edge, she has her keychain with mace ready to go.
Louis is the physical embodiment of the intrusion she's trying to get away from.
Yeah.
He recognizes her instantly, so there goes her anonymity, and then he immediately pitches her his crazy life story, claiming it could make you millions as a movie.
He's just treating her like a means to an end, an extension of that transactional world she just fled.
And there's this weird, awkward detail where he mentions he's dyslexic and he's nervous about his grammar in emails. Petra feels some sympathy, mentions her own father was dyslexic.
And he completely fumbles it, right.
Yeah.
He confuses her father with her mother and calls it a little dyslexia humor. It's just an immediate boundary-crossing exchange that tells you something is really off about this sanctuary.
It's setting the stage for manipulation. Louis and his wife, Mari or Marigold, are just a little too perfectly positioned. Mari shows up later with brownies, talking about how she works in Hollywood, doing reenactments for murder shows on the ID channel.
They confirm they watched her movie and that they saw the cops after some alleged incident. So they're established as people who are familiar with both the entertainment industry and the performance of fake violence.
Yeah. So in this sterile, anxious environment, Petra forces herself to figure out her new book. She decides on romantic suspense with a love triangle. The main characters are Rhea, a badass attorney, and the love interest, Cam, a hot cop.
But the writer's block is still there because she's stuck on that old saying, write what you know. She doesn't think she can write a believable thriller because her own life is, as she puts it, boring, predictable, and not at all worth writing about.
And this is the psychological trigger for everything that's about to happen. This belief that she has to earn her plot through real-life experience.
She talks about this with her friend Nora during a live Q&A, and Nora challenges her, right? She reminds her that her bestseller was about a woman falling for an ex-convict, which Petra definitely hadn't experienced.
Nora makes the great counter-argument. Realism is overrated. Sometimes people just want to escape into something that feels impossible.
But Petra can't hear that. She's so deep in her need for authenticity after being called a hypocrite. The public backlash made her feel fake, so she thinks the only cure is to become intensely, dangerously real.
She says maybe she needs to go live a little, do some dangerous, suspenseful shit. And that's when Nora, tragically, gives her the spark of the idea that will nearly ruin her life.
Nora jokingly suggests she should have an affair with a hot cop to really understand the emotions. Petra laughs it off, but it's a dark joke. It's born of desperation.
And that joke becomes terrifyingly real, almost instantly. As she's wrestling with this exact idea, at 5 in the morning, there's a knock at the door. It's a police officer. The fictional world she wanted literally just manifested on her doorstep.
Officer Nathaniel Saint. He tells her there was an incident nearby. A wanted parole violator named Don William Putman committed suicide on the road.
And the key here is her immediate, overwhelming creative response. She's not captivated by the tragedy. She's captivated by Saint.
He's physically perfect for her character, Cam. Tall, broad-shouldered, and muscular, she feels like she's found my muse, and the first details she clocks.
The wedding ring. The glint of a wedding ring on his left hand. It adds that perfect layer of complication she needed for her fictional married cop.
The disruption, the fear, the sheer presence of this man, it just shatters her writer's block. The source material says this is the most dopamine I've had in years. She writes almost 10,000 words that night, an insane breakthrough after 18 months of nothing.
The trauma became the fuel.
And the novel is now officially shifting gears. We're moving from a story about career anxiety to a really dangerous psychological thriller. This breakthrough validates her belief that she needs chaos, which takes us right into part 3, where the lines between research and violation they completely disappear.
He agrees to meet her again, supposedly to answer her cop questions for the book. But he's already done his own research. He admits he Googled her, he watched her old TikToks with Nora, so there's this foundation of calculated intent from the very beginning.
And Petra consciously leans into this idea of method writing to justify what's happening. She knows she has a rigid moral code. I don't flirt with other women's men. But she tells herself she's stepping into the skin of Rhea, her character, to allow herself to flirt with this married man.
And Saint plays right into it. He encourages this rationalization. He tells her what they're doing is a good deed because it's helping her with her research. He admits his own marriage is complicated. So he's not a cheater, you see. He's a muse for a struggling artist.
It's a mutually agreed upon fantasy. It's a way for both of them to avoid taking responsibility for what they're doing.
And what's so fascinating is that it's all rooted in a lie, but not just his lie, her lie to herself. She wants the guilt and the high stakes of cheating with a married man because that's what her fictional character needs. She's literally sacrificing her own morals for the sake of the plot.
But then the plot takes a very, very dark turn. It goes way beyond just intellectual research. During one of their meetings, Petra tells Saint about the plot points for her character, Rhea. Kidnapping, a broken arm, being tied up.
She's basically giving him her screenplay notes.
And he takes those notes and he acts them out, literally. He breaks into her house. She was so engrossed in writing, she forgot to lock the door, and he physically ties her up, following the script she laid out.
This isn't flirting anymore. This is a non-consensual act of violation that's being framed as research. She wakes up terrified, screaming his name, feeling this sharp, stabbing pain in her shoulder.
The sources detail the trauma. The rope leaves red marks on her wrists, and when she confronts him afterwards, he gives her this shocking, psychologically manipulative excuse.
He says he thought she was asking him to do it. When you told me about your book, I thought you were asking me to. It's a critical moment. He flips the blame right back onto her, using her own desire for realism as a weapon against her.
And this is where Petra's denial is just at its absolute peak. Instead of seeing him as an aggressor, as a threat, she rationalizes his actions.
She concludes he was trying to give me the experience he thought I was asking for in a safe way. She minimizes the trauma immediately. The red marks will fade, she thinks. And then she decides that she started this game.
That self-blame is her defense mechanism. If she admits she was traumatized, the muse goes away and the writer's block comes back. By telling herself she started it, she keeps creative control over the violation. She sees it as a necessary, painful step.
It's chilling. She is willing to endure abuse if it means she can write. It's the ultimate form of self-sabotage in the name of art. But the cracks in Saint's own story start to appear during a boat trip.
Right. The affair is still going, but the foundational lie gets chipped away. He reveals that he and his wife actually separated 6 months ago.
So he's not a married man struggling with guilt. He's technically available, which completely eliminates the specific moral complication Petra needed for her fiction.
He also shares this really vulnerable detail about not being able to have children. And while it feels like a moment of real connection, it also undermines the whole narrative she's built. He was pretending to be a married cop because that was the character she needed him to be.
Which should have been a massive red flag. He's prioritizing her plot over his own reality. If he's willing to lie about his marriage to fuel her muse, what else is he lying about?
And that question brings us to part 4, where the whole deception just unravels completely, and we see the ultimate multi-layered betrayal that puts her entire family at risk.
It all starts with a chance encounter with Louis Longsetter at a gas station. Petra casually asks the clerk, Bill, about the incident and the police chase that she still thinks is real.
And Bill just says no. No police chase, no suicide, nothing happened on that road.
The reality of her sanctuary just crumbles. Louis steps in and confirms it. He says, "We don't have detectives here, and the man in the photo she has of Saint is definitely not a local cop."
And Bill, the clerk, adds that he's seen the tall man in the black car renting a place nearby. So Saint is a stranger, an outsider.
The implication is just devastating. The entire foundation of her inspiration, the dead parolee, the detective, the trauma, the dopamine rush, it was all a meticulously engineered lie.
So she confronts Mari, Louis's wife, who, for a bit of cash, finally confesses.
Mari admits Saint paid her off. He paid me to pretend. She says she saw him planting fake police lights, confronted him, and he told her he was just playing an innocent prank to give Petra some writing inspiration.
And Mari's justification was that she didn't think it would harm you in any way.
But her real motive reinforces that transactional world perfectly. She says, I love money more than I love pranks. She was an innocent bystander who became a guilty participant for a paycheck. She enabled the whole delusion.
And Petra's own research confirms the rest. She searches the phone number she has for Saint, and it leads her to his LinkedIn profile.
And his real identity is revealed. Eric Merrill Kingston, a screenwriter. He's not law enforcement. He's a professional storyteller. A rival, even. He engineered her entire experience.
That is the meta twist. It wasn't an affair with a cop. It was a calculated deception by another writer who knew exactly how to use her desperation for authenticity against her. He didn't just give her a muse. He wrote the conditions for her inspiration.
But the real collision of fiction and reality happens when her husband, Shepard, and their two little girls unexpectedly show up at the cabin.
Petra is just thrown into absolute terror. She realizes her illicit research has now contaminated the last safe part of her real, boring life. And right as she's texting Saint to call it all off,
He pulls up in the black car, still in full uniform. The uniform is part of his control.
Shepard confronts him, asking, "Can I help you, pet?" using her nickname. And Petra, in a desperate move to save her marriage, performs the ultimate betrayal of Saint. She tells Shepard, no idea who this man is.
She completely denies their entire shared history. And Eric, or Saint, realizing he's been dismissed, retaliates instantly. He doubles down on the act. He says he's investigating an unreported incident involving a car parked near her rental Shepard's car.
She realizes immediately what he's doing. It's about control and anger and intrusion. He's injecting himself into her family life to show her she can't just wish him away.
And the ultimate violation happens later that night. While Shepard is in the shower, Saint calls her. He doesn't ask about her lie. He reveals he was watching them earlier.
The line is just terrifying. He says, I saw him go into the bathroom. He's letting her know she's under surveillance. He taunts her, asks if she's going to fuck him tonight, and then he delivers this explicit command.
This is the psychological peak of the violation. The command is chilling. He tells her, when your husband fucks you tonight, get on top and pretend you're fucking me.
It ensures that even when she's back in the safety of her marriage, Eric has permanently intruded. He's contaminating her deepest intimacy, not just her creative space.
He's stealing her narrative control. And the method writing comes to its horrible conclusion right there. The memory of Saint is superimposed over Shepard during sex, and Petra sees it as the most fucked up thing I've ever done.
But there's one more layer of betrayal to peel back, and it brings us all the way back to her friend Nora.
2 years later, it's the release day Q&A for Woman Down, the book that came from all this trauma. And Eric shows up in the crowd. He asks her to sign a book, making her write Eric, not Saint, just to remind her that he's the author of her experience.
But the real shock is when she sees Eric wave at Nora, her best friend, who is smiling with, quote, giddiness.
Petra is terrified. He's manipulating Nora now, too. But then Nora confesses, I was trying to help. She admits she sent Eric to the cabin in the first place.
No way.
Yeah. She knew him from college. He convinced her to ask him to show up in uniform just to give Petra a little inspiration. Nora claims she never intended for anything more than a quick question-and-answer session. She's shocked that something else happened.
So Nora, the one who suggested the exposure therapy, the one who joked about the hot cop, she was the well-meaning but disastrous first domino.
Exactly. She didn't mean to sabotage her friend, but her desperate attempt to help just opened the door for this man to emotionally destroy Petra. Eric later confirms his motive. He pushed Nora because he wanted to meet Petra, and then he became intrigued, more than intrigued, so I kept it up without telling her.
He saw an opportunity to write himself into her life and into her next bestseller. The cost of that inspiration is just monumental. Which brings us to part V, the very ominous conclusion.
Petra is left with a shattered friendship and a nearly destroyed marriage, and she realizes that this moral collapse was something she was perfectly capable of doing with or without our help. Her friend just provided the opening.
She regrets it all so profoundly. Her desire for dangerous, suspenseful shit is gone. Now she just craves the boring and complacency of her old life with Shepard. She's learned that chaos isn't a requirement for authenticity. It's just a destructive force.
And she sees the title, Woman Down, as a perfect description of her life and her characters. She remembers Eric's final, arrogant taunt to her back at the cabin, the line that establishes his ownership over her work.
When you finish this book, dedicate it to Saint, because he fucked that story out of you.
It just perfectly summarizes his view of the whole narrative. He sees the story as his creation, conceived through her violation.
So in a final act to try and get some control back, she blocks his number. She thinks she's finally closed the door on the story he wrote for her. But then she gets 2 emails.
The first is a reservation confirmation for the rental cabin, the site of her trauma, which she swore she'd never go back to. She knows she didn't book it.
And the second email is the real cliffhanger. It's from an unknown address, and it just says, "I think it's time we start working on your next book, Petra."
And the story ends with that chilling realization. Eric is still orbiting her life. He still sees her story, and maybe her suffering, as his source material. The man who pretended to be a fictional archetype has become her relentless, real-life antagonist.
What an incredible, multi-layered deep dive. We've really analyzed the crushing cost of fame, the extreme measures taken for creative authenticity, and the calculated manipulation that just exploited a writer's deepest insecurities.
We saw how Petra Rose, desperate to escape fan backlash and writer's block, just abandoned all of her personal boundaries for what she called method writing. She needed a story, and Eric Kingston gave her one, at the cost of her peace, her marriage, and her safety. The whole book is really a reflection on how creative desperation can be weaponized against the artist herself.
So the key takeaway for you listening to this is to really understand the profound psychological impact of that creative pressure, especially when you combine it with public scrutiny. This deep dive showed how a crisis can lead a person to abandon all their ethics, tragically believing that chaos and trauma are necessary for art, only to find out that the authenticity was manufactured and the trauma was all too real.
And now, a final provocative thought for you to mull over, building on Eric Kingston's claim that he wrote her book for her. If Petra Rose's most successful work, Woman Down, was generated entirely by this manipulative external force, does that success somehow validate the trauma she endured? And given that chilling final email, can Petra ever truly escape the story that Eric Kingston wrote for her, or is she now perpetually caught in his narrative, forced to keep writing sequels just to survive?